Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and we're going to today continue our discussion of genealogy standards, standards for researching, standard number 48, resolving evidence inconsistencies, and standard 49, unresolved evidence inconsistencies. Please remember that I do not represent the Board for Certification of Genealogists. What we're dealing with is just my opinion today. So standard number 48, resolving evidence inconsistencies. Genealogists attempt to resolve conflicts or incompatibilities among two or more evidence items. Resolution involves A, identifying evidence items that support each side of a conflict, and B, articulating a defensible rationale for setting aside evidence items that support all but one side of the conflict. Defensible rationales include showing, after all known relevant evidence is considered, that A, only one uncorroborated evidence item or only one combination of related evidence items supports one side. B, showing that significantly more error-prone sources and information items support one side. C, explaining why evidence for one side is substantially less credible than evidence for the other side. Or D, any combination of rationales A through C. See glossary for definitions of compatible evidence, conflicting evidence, evidence, information, related information, and resolution. This actually is one of the biggest problems that we encounter in genealogy. Many people will just look at those inconsistencies and just shove them aside, throw them underneath the rug, and forget about them. And trust me, that will come back and bite you in the derriere, I promise. This is what actually establishes a person as a really good genealogist, the ability to see the conflicts and incompatibilities among the evidence items, and then being able to put them in the right pot. Recognize that there is the concept of quality and the concept of quantity doesn't work here. Just because 14 sources say one thing and one source says something else doesn't mean that the 14 sources are right. There is not a preponderance of the evidence, meaning there's so much evidence that says this. And one of the reasons for that is because, as you're well aware by now, that we sometimes are dealing with things that are not original sources. We sometimes are dealing with things that basically are derivative and derived from false information to begin with. What I do is I try to identify what I believe, based on everything that I've seen in the evidence so far, is the hypothesis that I want to live with. And then I attempt to determine what is not consistent with that hypothesis. And then I destroy those items basically in my own mind in such a way that I can demonstrate to others that this just doesn't count. So you want to be sure to create buckets, see what's in each bucket, evaluate the credibility of the evidence in each bucket, and ensure that things will work together. Evidence works together. It doesn't act in isolation. So you want to make sure that you have considered all the known relevant information. In other words, don't ignore anything, because remember, it will come back and bite you. You also need to resolve these inconsistencies, because someone else will find them and they will point to them and they will say, well, you didn't do. So you want to mention the inconsistencies. And I think that if you look at it from the perspective of you need to create a need package, that you will be successful. Now, standard number 49 helps you to deal with the issue when you're unable to resolve those evidence inconsistencies, because standard number 49 is unresolved evidence inconsistencies. Genealogists understand that not all conflicting evidence can be resolved, and that in such circumstance, a conclusion cannot be proved. See glossary for definitions of conflicting evidence, evidence, and resolution. Now, that doesn't mean that a conclusion cannot exist. You can have a conclusion, you just it won't be proved. That's why we have in front of evidence explained, there are words in there, and one of those words is probable. Probable means it's not proved, but probable means it might be right. Recognize that if there are inconsistencies, which you cannot put in the right bucket or explain why that inconsistency exists, that you will not be able to prove your conclusion. But it can be probable. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't publish it because it's not proved, because we build on the work of others. And someone may take your work that you have not proved and find the necessary information to prove it. And that happens sometimes. What we mostly have to remember is, let's not make anything up. I have a rule, and that rule is, it's actually number 6 of my 7 rules. You will get caught. And number 7 of my rules is also, you will get caught. So recognize that it's important for you to resolve these inconsistencies. And in the absence of being able to resolve these inconsistencies, do not ignore them, mention them, demonstrate that you're aware of them, and draw a conclusion which, unfortunately, you will be unable to prove. So this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy. I would ask you to subscribe if you haven't. I would ask you to tell your friends if you haven't. And thank you so much for joining me today.